Hi everyone and welcome to the Linear Cloud podcast. My name is Christian and I'm a cloud optimization specialist focused on AWS. But first, a few words about myself. I have almost a decade of experience of using AWS, first as a DevOps engineer working on a few websites with millions of users, then building cost optimization tools for AWS. I also worked at AWS as a specialist solution architect for Spot and Graviton, where I helped customers optimize their cloud environment, and I'm now starting my own business in the cloud optimization space. In this podcast, I try to explore in depth the various ways to optimize your cloud environment for things like performance, high availability, latency, but also cost. The goal is to help you better serve your users through lower latency and high availability, but also save your company money by running efficiently in the cloud. This podcast can get technical at times, but I'm trying my best to explain everything in simple terms. So please don't worry if you're not technical, and always feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions. You can find me at linearcloud.com. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Hi everyone and welcome to the third episode of the Linear Cloud podcast. As a little recap, in the previous episode, we started a series of deep dives into cost optimization mechanisms. We then started with compute, which is typically the main cost driver in AWS and in general in the cloud, and started by covering the lowest hanging fruits, which are ROIs and savings plans, which are ways that can give you the capacity savings without having to do any engineering work. So you're just doing it at the billing level and commit for a payment on a monthly basis or all upfront and so on. And then I talked about them both in depth from the technical side, covering the theory of why would you want to do it, what options you have, which are the options you have. But then I realized that I should also talk a bit about the how you do it. So in today's episode, I'll try to talk a bit about a few strategies that I would recommend for implementing ROIs or savings plans in practice. If you just started listening to the podcast with this episode and want to get into the technicalities of ROIs and savings plans, you can also listen to the previous episode. But anyway, I'll do a little recap of the necessary things we need in this conversation. So how it works, ROIs and savings plans are just hourly spend based commitment, which is similar to how you would purchase a season ticket for your favorite football team versus purchasing every match the normal tickets. So typically you get these at a discount, but then you have to go to the matches every week. Otherwise, you just paid for it and you will not use it. So it's the same with the ROIs and savings plans. So what you can do is with these is you can cover workload that has a fixed size. So if you're purchasing a reservation or a savings plan for this particular workload, assuming that workload doesn't grow or doesn't shrink, you're good to go, you're covered. Also, it can cover the baseline capacity of a workload that is scaling over time. For example, if you're scaling on a daily basis, you could cover the baseline with this and then cover the rest with Spot or maybe on demand. It's very good for things like databases, where you just purchase this and it's going to run at lower rates for the rest of the purchase commitment time. Now, the drawbacks are, of course, it will not cover the usage above or below this baseline. If you're above the baseline, you will pay the normal on-demand price unless you use Spot. If you're below the baseline, you generate some waste. So typically, the more advanced customers have these reservations for the baseline, but then use a mix of Spot and on-demand for that additional capacity. And for example, my tool AutoSpotting is a great way to get that capacity on top of this baseline capacity. So it can be configured to keep a certain capacity in each of the groups covered as keep it as on demand, and then you can cover that as savings plans, and then anything on top of that capacity will be purchased as spot capacity. And it automates this with very little friction, not so much more effort than just purchasing these things. Yeah, so going back to the drawback, you can also sometimes see a little waste, because after all, it may not be always perfect. So if you overcommit at times, you will run below the commitment, and it's okay. I mean, you have to think about it as you're with savings plans or RIs, you're paying for like half the price of what you would be paying usually. And if it's not perfect, you still have a bit of waste. It's not like a big tragedy, considering where you're coming from and how much you used to pay. So accept this little waste as a part of the process. Yeah. Another consideration is that if you have a large organization with multiple accounts and consolidated billing, they can even out if one of the teams doesn't need them, but they are used then automatically in another team from your organization. So this allows you to even out at scale, and then they cancel each other if you have accounts that don't use them versus accounts that need them but don't have them. And yeah, it's one thing you have to keep in mind. This is a, as we call it in Amazon, we used to call it's a one-way door. So once you commit to it, it's a done deal. So you will pay for it in the most cases for the next 3 years or 1 year, depending how much you commit to pay. So it requires a little planning, and it's not something that you have to do as a quick fix or very early in your cloud journey. And I'm going to share now a story of one of the customers that I had in Amazon. They just started, they did a lift and shift migration to the cloud in one of their environments. And what they did, they immediately purchased reserved instances 3 years all up front, but for the wrong operating system. So they were running Red Hat, and they purchased them for Red Hat, but then their lift and shift migration was done with a tool that converted their Red Hat instances to normal Linux instances that would be charged as the normal Linux price, and then they would have a bring your own license for the Red Hat. So basically, they got these instances running, getting charged as normal Linux instances, but then they purchased the reservation as Red Hat. And then they came to us in panic mode as, yeah, we are paying for this because they paid for the reservation, and they also paid for the on-demand price of the instances that they were running. So they were, yeah, way over budget. They budgeted for the RI cost of the proper operating system, but then they were not covered, and then they were charged also for the on-demand price. So what we did, we just converted them to savings plans, but the savings plans were converted at the same size what they had. So they were like, they had a missed opportunity to optimize their cloud costs, and then for the next few years they will have to run this environment at this overscale capacity, because the environment, when we looked at it, it was severely overscaled. Like it was at 1% usage continuously. So it was such a missed opportunity for them to right size that environment first, and then maybe choose the right instance types based on their usage. And only after that, once you see everything how it's supposed to be running, then you purchase the commitment for what you actually need for your workload. So that's a lesson for anybody who starts in the cloud. Don't commit too early for these. Run for a month or two, or 3 or 6 months, even as on demand, and try to use that time as a grace period to do some right sizing, fiddling instance types, choosing the right one for you, maybe looking into Graviton and whatever. So you can do a ton of things before doing this purchase, which is definitely a low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to do, but you should do it carefully only after doing the right sizing. So yeah, that was a story, because you will not be able to scale down if you would purchase these RIs using some automation tools. They can help you with buyback guarantees, but they come with a higher cost, and then also they charge you 20 to 25% of the savings. And also, if you paid upfront, you have to pay Amazon 12% of the upfront you paid as a fee. Yeah. So I'm going to now talk a bit about the strategy that I would recommend for purchasing RIs and savings plans. So it's not just going to your account and purchasing everything for your entire capacity. You first have to look at your baseline usage over time and think about it as a long-term process, maybe in parallel to your cultural transformation of using the cloud well, with right sizing and choosing the right instance types and so on. So try to buy in smaller amounts if you do it yourself. Yeah, and basically you should have somebody or some automation to occasionally look at your usage and purchase these RIs or savings plans to have coverage for what you need, but also make sure you use other purchasing options for things on top of the baseline. So when should you buy tools versus to do it yourself? Basically, when you don't expect to need to downscale, you may have an application that keeps growing, and in that case you can just purchase savings plans manually, and every few months you purchase more to keep the coverage relatively high. And when, for example, you're running at such a large scale that you don't want to pay a percentage of the savings to the tool vendors, it can be significant at scale. So you could probably pay a few full-time employees to manage the capacity reservations for you, or build automation that does the same thing. Now, keep in mind that some of these tools also are more than just the automation. They also have buyback guarantees for the capacity. So in some cases, you pay more, you pay 20 to 25% of the savings, but then they guarantee that they will buy that instance from you. And that's not something that you can do on your own. So you could purchase this capacity without paying anybody, but then if you want to sell it, it will not be covered by that guarantee. And what I would do in that case, if you do it yourself, I'd just use compute savings plans, the 3-year option, and the more upfront you can afford, the better, because you're getting better savings from that. And yeah, I mean, chances are you could do better things with the money. I mean, that's up to you to decide. You could also pay it on a monthly basis for a bit less savings, but then do something else with that money, the difference. That's kind of up to you to calculate and see how much money you can afford. Now, when would you use a tool for managing the reserved instances? And so a good scenario is when you have a seasonal usage pattern. For example, you have increased traffic during the Christmas season, but then you want to have coverage for just for that duration, for that time of the year, and then stop having the reservation for the rest of the year. Another scenario could be when you're in the tax business, and a lot of companies in that space have a peak around, I think it's May or April, when it's the end of the fiscal year. But anyway, that's a scenario when you can have a lot of usage for a short amount of time, and you want to have lower costs for that. You purchase it through a tool, and then the tool will automate the choosing of RIs and savings RIs for your particular availability zone, for your particular instance type. And this will also allow you to have a guarantee of capacity for that peak, since you're using zonal RIs which guarantee capacity. And this scenario is easier to do with a tool than to do it manually, because if you're doing manually, you have to go and fiddle with the capacity. When you reserve, you have to give the instance type, you have to give this availability zone, and so on. And this can be a tedious process at scale if you're running and if you're doing it manually. So it's also opening up for human errors, that somebody will mistype something, and then you're stuck with it for 3 years, unless you again sell it 1 month later. So a tool reduces this chance for human error in that situation. And also the tools that have buyback guarantee, they will take the risk for you to not be able to sell that RI when the time comes that you no longer need it. And we have two different types of tools. As I said, there are tools which have this buyback guarantee, and they charge 20 to 25% of the savings, which comes around 10% of your spend, of your EC2 spend, when you look at it, considering that the RIs cover about half of the pricing. And there are other tools that cost significantly less, but they do not offer the buyback guarantee. They are more like if you would do it in-house with a script, and then if you do it in-house with a script, there is nobody to buy it from you if you do it yourself. So it's kind of the same model like these other class of tools that give you that don't give you the ability to buy it back guarantee. So, for example, these tools such as Vantage Autopilot, they only charge 5% of the savings, which comes around 2 to 3% of your spend, of your EC2 cost. But now what happens if later, let's say 2 years from now, you want to switch to newer instance types? And this is a bit of a tricky situation for you, but also for the tool providers, for the vendors. Because if you're doing it yourself, or using this simpler, lightweight tool that just doesn't offer the buyback guarantee, you're at a risk that you will not be able to sell this instance to anybody when the time comes, like 2 years from now, when you switch to a newer instance type. Now, what can happen is, if you're using another tool that does the buyback guarantee for you, in that case, you can take that risk and give it to that vendor. You pay them more, but then they take care of this. So they take those instances, maybe they buy them themselves from you, and then it's their problem what to do with them. So they could maybe just, I don't know, offer them for other companies at a very low price to do calculations on them or whatever, because then they paid for it. and they should offer it like a sort of a spot market for other companies. But that's no longer your problem, that's their problem at the time. So that's kind of the situations. I don't know if any of these vendors have seen this sort of scenario yet. I assume maybe not, because they are relatively new to the market, and the C5 family, for example, is 4 or 5 years old, and people still use them. But then as new generations come, people will want to use the new generations and will be reluctant to buy the old generation as an RI, even if the RI is still at a nice discount, but you can get that discount from the new generation, which gives you also increased performance. So yeah, that's kind of pretty much it. So to summarize, you should use RIs and savings plans, but only after you optimized in other ways to make sure that you're not running an oversized environment. Actually, to be honest, I would first use spot instances if possible for the workloads that I have, because spot gives you even better savings and doesn't need this commitment, and there is no risk attached to this part of it. But then spot comes with its own caveats, and I will cover spot in one of the future episodes. But for spot, yeah, there are also ways to make it safe and to get capacity and so on, and I'll cover all that when the time comes. So stay tuned for an episode on spot. And yeah, that's pretty much it for now. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you like this episode. If you find it useful, please give it a good rating on your podcast app, whatever it is, because these ratings help other people find it. You can also share it with some of your colleagues who may also like this information or benefit from it. And if you need any help setting up or maintaining your RI and savings plans coverage, or even doing the right sizing effort and maybe adopting Spot and Graviton, all the other things, I can help with all that. So please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me at linearcloud.com, and there's also contact information at the bottom of the page. So yeah, that's kind of it. Thank you so much for your attention, and see you soon in our next episode. Bye.